My name is Evelyn Carter, and I never imagined that the cruelest words I would ever hear would come from my own son at my husband's funeral. The church was hushed that morning, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows, casting colored light across Daniel's casket. I stood at the front, hands clasped tight against my chest, forcing myself to hold steady as neighbors and old friends came forward with soft words of comfort. Every "I'm sorry for your loss" only reminded me that I was losing far more than just my husband. Jason, my only son, leaned close as the service was ending. His hand brushed my arm, and for a split second, I thought he was going to whisper something kind, something that would keep me from collapsing under the weight of the day. Instead, he murmured, his voice sharp enough to cut through the organ's fading notes. "Mom, it's time for you to move out of the house." The world seemed to tilt, my chest tightened, and for a moment I thought I hadn't heard him right. But when I turned, his eyes didn't carry grief or tenderness. They carried calculation, like he had been waiting for this moment. I swallowed hard, heat rising in my throat, but I said nothing. My fingers dug into the edge of the pew as I steadied myself. Not here. Not in front of everyone. My heart hammered as I caught the faintest trace of impatience on his face, as if my silence was an inconvenience. Daniel's photograph rested on an easel beside the casket, his smile frozen in time. He would have hated this, his son treating me like a burden before the flowers had even wilted. I blinked away tears, but I felt something else stirring beneath the grief. Disbelief sliding into anger, and anger settling into a cold determination. Jason didn't know the truth. He didn't know that the house he was so eager to claim no longer belonged to him, not even a little. Daniel had made sure of that before he died. I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and walked down the aisle behind the casket. My husband was being laid to rest, and my son had just declared war on the one thing Daniel had asked me to protect. When the last handful of earth was dropped over Daniel's casket, I felt the weight of memories pressing harder than the autumn sky. I drove home alone that afternoon, past the streets we had walked together 1,000 times. The house stood at the end of the block, weathered but solid, with peeling white paint and the porch swing Daniel had insisted on fixing every spring. To Jason, it was just real estate. To me, it was the story of our lives. I still remember the day Daniel first pulled me onto this patch of land. We were both barely out of our 20s, pockets nearly empty but spirits high. "It's not much now," he had said, brushing dirt from his work shirt, "but it'll be ours if we're willing to sweat for it." I laughed back then, half terrified, half in love with his certainty. Those early years nearly broke us. Daniel worked double shifts at the auto shop, grease under his fingernails no matter how hard he scrubbed. I worked evenings at the grocery store, standing on my feet until they throbbed. On weekends, we came here together, hammering nails, painting walls, building a home board by board. There were nights we ate peanut butter sandwiches on the floor because the kitchen wasn't finished yet, and we'd laugh as if we were feasting. I can still hear the crack of Daniel's laugh echoing through the unfinished rooms. Jason, just a toddler running between piles of lumber. Back then, he loved the smell of sawdust, the thrill of climbing into his father's arms after a long day of work. The house became more than shelter. It became proof that sacrifice meant something, that love could be nailed into every wall. One night, exhausted, I asked Daniel if it was worth it, if this broken-down house would ever feel like a home. He cupped my face, eyes shining in the dim light of a single lamp. "It's already a home, Eve," he whispered, "because you're here with me." Or that was the foundation, stronger than any beam or stone. Now, years later, standing at the front door after his funeral, Jason's words still echoing in my ears, I pressed my palm against the wooden frame. The house held every laugh, every fight, every kiss we'd ever shared. It was my promise to Daniel, and I knew in my bones I couldn't let anyone take it away. Jason grew up inside these walls, his height measured in pencil marks along the kitchen doorway, his laughter echoing through the hall every summer night. For years, this place was his playground, and he was our joy. But as he grew older, the warmth that once filled him seemed to cool. I remember the first time he wrinkled his nose at the house. He had just turned 16 and was riding home with a friend whose parents lived in a brand new subdivision across town. When we pulled into our driveway, Jason muttered, "Why can't we live in a place like theirs? Look at this place. Peeling paint, sagging porch. It's embarrassing." The word stung, sharper than he realized. Daniel brushed it off with a laugh, patting Jason on the shoulder. "This house has more history than all those shiny boxes put together," he said, but Jason only rolled his eyes and stormed inside. As the years passed, the distance between us grew. In college, he rarely came home except on holidays, and when he did, he seemed restless, scrolling on his phone, avoiding long conversations. The boy who once begged to help his father fix the swing now acted like every chore was beneath him. One Thanksgiving, I tried to remind him of simpler times. "Remember how you used to sneak cookies from the counter while I was baking?" I teased, hoping for a smile. Jason smirked, but his reply cut deep. "Yeah, well, maybe if we'd had a better house back then, I wouldn't have felt like the poor kid in school." Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't say anything, but later that night I found him sitting alone on the porch, staring at the yard he had worked so hard to keep. "He doesn't see it, Eve," he said quietly. "He doesn't see what this house cost us, or what it gave him." I wanted to believe Jason's words were just the arrogance of youth, something he would outgrow, but the pattern deepened. Success, money, appearances, those became his compass. Love, memory, sacrifice. Ours didn't matter anymore. The night I realized how far he had drifted, he came home from the city in a tailored suit, standing in the same kitchen where we once ate peanut butter sandwiches. He glanced around and sighed. "You two could sell this place and finally live decently. Doesn't it bother you, staying stuck here?" I felt Daniel's hand slip into mine under the table, steady and strong. His silence said everything. We were losing our son, not to distance, but to values we couldn't recognize. It was early spring when Daniel first coughed so hard he had to grip the counter just to steady himself. At first, we laughed it off, blaming the dust from his endless tinkering in the garage, but the cough deepened, his weight dropped, and before long, the doctor's grim face told us what we dreaded: lung cancer, already advanced. The news carved a hollow space inside me. I tried to keep my face calm when Jason called, but my voice betrayed me. "Your father's sick, honey. We'll know more soon." Jason sighed on the other end, muttering something about work deadlines before promising to visit when he could. Weeks passed before he showed up, and even then, his eyes darted more toward his phone than his father's weary face. Daniel never complained, but at night, when the house went still, he would take my hand and whisper, "Don't let him see me weak, Eve. He already thinks I failed by keeping us here." I told him he hadn't failed, that this home was proof of everything we'd built, but I could see the shadow in his eyes, the fear that Jason's bitterness would outlast his own heartbeat. One evening, after another round of treatments, had left him pale and shaking. Daniel asked me to bring out the old wooden box from the closet. Inside were the papers he had been working on quietly with our attorney. The deed to the house, signed over solely in my name. He pressed the documents into my hands. This house is yours now. Evelyn, not his. I know what Jason will try to do once I'm gone. Promise me you'll protect it, no matter how much it hurts. Tears blurred the ink as I traced my finger across Daniel's shaky signature. I wanted to argue, to insist Jason would come to his senses, but the truth weighed heavier than hope. Our son's eyes no longer softened when he looked at this place. They sharpened, calculating its worth in dollars instead of memories. I promise, I whispered, choking on the words. Daniel's lips curved into a faint smile, his hand trembling against mine. Good. Then I can rest easy. That night, long after he'd fallen asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The deed spread out in front of me. The paper felt colder than stone, but beneath its weight was the fire of my vow. Jason didn't know it yet, but I was ready. The morning after Daniel's funeral, the house was too quiet. The scent of lilies from the church still clung to my coat, and the air felt heavy, as if grief had seeped into the walls. I thought I would have at least a few days to breathe, to gather myself. But Jason didn't wait. He arrived that afternoon, his suit still pressed from the service, though his tie hung loose. He stood in the doorway, glancing around as if taking inventory. "Mom," he said briskly, "you can't stay here by yourself. It doesn't make sense. You should come live with me. This place, it's just too much for you." I folded my hands, forcing calm into my voice. "I'm fine here. Jason, this is my home." He sighed, pulling a business card from his pocket and setting it on the kitchen table. The glossy print caught the sunlight. Realtor, big smile, bold phone number. "I've already spoken to someone who can help. The market's hot right now. You could sell this house for a fortune and live comfortably. Isn't that what Dad would have wanted?" The audacity stung. Daniel hadn't been gone 48 hours, and already our son was circling like a hawk. Before I could answer, Jason's fiancée, Lauren, stepped inside, her heels clicking against the worn floorboards. She gave me a tight smile, the kind people wear when they're trying to mask impatience. "It's such a charming house," she said, her eyes sweeping the living room. "But with a little staging, it could really shine. Buyers eat up this vintage style." My heart thudded, each word cutting deeper. They weren't just thinking about my future, they were imagining their profit. From the porch, I caught sight of Marjorie, my neighbor for 30 years, pausing with her mail in hand, her brows knit together, and I knew she could sense the tension even from across the street. Shame and anger flushed my face, but I swallowed it down. Jason leaned closer, his tone sharper now. "Don't be stubborn, Mom. You can't manage this place alone. Selling is the smart move." I looked at him, really looked, at the impatience in his eyes, the way his arm circled Lauren's waist protectively, as if they were already standing in a home of their own. I said nothing. Instead, I slid the realtor's card back across the table toward him. His brow furrowed, but I held his gaze steady. Inside, though, Daniel's words echoed, "Protect this home. Don't let greed take it away." The following weekend, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside and looked through the lace curtain. Jason was back, and this time he wasn't alone. Lauren stepped out of the passenger seat, her heels clicking against the driveway. A third man followed, trim suit, leather briefcase in hand. Even before Jason rang the bell, I knew who he was. When I opened the door, Jason didn't bother with pleasantries. "Mom, this is Mark? He's a realtor. I asked him to take a look at the property, just to give us an idea of what we're working with. What we're working with. The words scraped against me, as though the house, my home, were already a shared business venture. Mark smiled politely, extending a hand. Mrs. Carter, I'm sorry for your loss. You have a lovely home. With a few updates, you could get top dollar. I didn't take his hand. Instead, I stepped aside, letting them in, because refusing would only give Jason another reason to call me unreasonable. They wandered the living room, Mark pointing out where walls could be painted, Lauren suggesting new light fixtures. Jason trailed behind them, nodding as though I were invisible. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm but firm. This isn't a good time. I don't want strangers in my home right now. Jason shot me a look, half exasperation, half warning. Mom, don't make this harder. We're trying to help you. You don't have to carry this place anymore. Lauren chimed in, her tone syrupy. Think about how much simpler life would be. Evelyn, you could let go of all this. Responsibility. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face composed. I watched them move through the rooms like surveyors measuring land they already owned. Every corner they judged, every flaw they pointed out, pressed harder against my chest. After they left, promising to run some numbers, I locked the door and leaned against it, the silence crashing back in. My hands trembled as I walked to the old hutch in the dining room. From the bottom drawer, I pulled out the envelope Daniel had signed with shaking hands just weeks before. I held the deed between my fingers, the paper crinkling softly. Jason thought I was powerless, but he didn't know the truth that lived inside these pages. I pressed the envelope flat against the table, whispering into the quiet room. Not yet, but soon. It didn't take long for Jason to return. A few days later, I heard the front door open without so much as a knock. He still had his old key. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, brisk and impatient, Lauren trailing behind him. Mom, he called, voice clipped. We need to make a decision. Mark has buyers lined up. If we act fast, you'll get the best price. I set my teacup down carefully, my hand steady though my heart was pounding. Jason, I told you before, I'm not selling this house. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his neatly combed hair. You're being stubborn. This place is falling apart. Do you want to waste the rest of your life patching leaks and mowing the lawn alone? Lauren's hand slipped into his, her eyes soft with what she must have thought was kindness. Evelyn, think about yourself for once. Don't you want freedom? Something in me snapped then, not in anger, but in resolve. I rose from my chair and crossed to the dining room hutch. With deliberate care, I pulled out the envelope Daniel had entrusted to me, the one I had guarded in silence since the night he signed it. I laid the papers on the table between us. You think I'm clinging to memories, but you don't understand. Jason, your father did. Before he died, he made sure this home would stay with me. The deed is in my name. Legally, this house isn't yours. It never will be. The room froze. Jason's face flushed red, his jaw tightening as he skimmed the pages. His eyes darted up, burning into mine. So that's it? You and Dad didn't trust me enough? You cut me out like I'm some stranger? I swallowed hard, my voice steady even as my chest ached. We loved you. We still do. But we saw where your heart was headed. This house was built on sacrifice, not greed. Your father wanted it safe. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes. Hurt. Maybe even shame. But it hardened quickly into rage. He shoved the papers back toward me, the edges crumpling. One day, he spat, this house will still be mine. He turned sharply, storming out with Lauren scrambling after him. The door slammed so hard the windows rattled, leaving me alone in the silence that followed. I pressed my hand flat against the deed, tears stinging my eyes. The battle was out in the open now, and nothing between us would ever be the same. The silence after Jason left was heavier than any slammed door. I stood there for a long while, my hand resting on the wrinkled papers, listening to the echo of his anger fade into the night. For the first time since Daniel's passing, I allowed myself to sob, not for my husband this time, but for the son I feared I had lost. The days that followed were quieter, but not empty. I found comfort in small rituals, watering the roses Daniel had planted decades ago, sweeping the porch where we'd once sat side by side with lemonade in hand, straightening the photo frames along the hallway. Each task was a thread, binding me to the promise I had made. Neighbors stopped by often, Marjorie especially. She'd bring me fresh muffins or just sit with me on the porch swing. Her silence a comfort all its own. She never asked about Jason, and I was grateful. The wound was still too raw to expose. At night, when the house creaked and the wind pressed against the shutters, I walked through each room slowly, the kitchen where Jason's laughter once rang out, the living room where Daniel and I danced to old records, the bedroom where we whispered dreams in the dark. Grief would press hard then, but beneath it was a steady calm. This house wasn't just wood and brick. It was the vessel of everything we had endured, everything we had loved. One evening, I found myself sitting on the porch with Daniel's photograph in my lap. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. I traced the lines of his smile, whispering, I kept my promise, Daniel. The house is safe. The ache in my chest didn't fade, but it softened. For a fleeting moment, I thought of Jason, of the boy who once clung to his father's shoulders, who once called this house home with pride. Maybe one day he would see past the price tags and fresh paint. Maybe one day he would remember what this place really meant. Until then, I would wait. I would tend the roses, keep the porch light burning, and hold fast to the vow I made, because this home was more than a possession. It was my sanctuary, my memory, my love story carved into every wall, and I wasn't going anywhere. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.